Good day, welcome to Westchester Talk Radio. I'm John Marino on this Christmas Eve, and we are produced by Sharc Creative at westchestertalkradio.com, made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric, don't be left in the dark again. Lipolis, Hightower, Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard. And White Plains Hospital, special thanks to our heroes at White Plains Hospital for all they've done with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic here in 2020. We wrap up the year here in the holiday season by talking with the supervisor of the town of North Castle, Michael Schiliro. North Castle comprised of Armonk, North White Plains, and the bucolic hamlet of Banksville. Michael Schiliro, thank you for joining us again here on Westchester Talk Radio. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you and yours, Mike.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy everything.
And it's
been quite a year.
Been quite a year, a trying 2020. How difficult of a year has this been for you? How challenging of a year in North Castle?
It's been very challenging. However, I will say that, at least for me, having served the longest on the current board, I first started serving in 2008, and that was right when the Great Recession started. So in an odd way, for those that were serving back that far, we've been through this exercise before. It looked different, and it feels a little different in certain respects, but some of the fundamentals are the same, especially when it comes to budgeting. Now, the whole COVID piece on the health side is a different challenge, and we've had to deal with that obviously differently and something we've never had to deal with before. But on the budgetary side and the economics, many of us have been through that before, and that made this much easier. Not easy, but easier in a relative sense versus having done it in 2008 and 2009, where we didn't have a real recent predecessor of an economy like that and a budget challenge. So it's been challenging, but we're still smiling and we're still getting through it.
Is there a provision in the budget that you can go back and adjust as need be during the year, or is it one size fits all? Once it's done, and you have to deal with it, work with the monies in there as already allocated?
No, you can. And now this year, we didn't necessarily have to do too much of that. In 2008, we did, because we were very short on the expected revenues in some certain categories other than real estate taxes. And we had to adjust and make cuts in the budget on the fly. Some municipalities did that again this year. We were fortunate that through from the last recession, we've continued to build our fund balance for economies and budget cycles like this. Honestly, when we started that process in 2009, I always felt that it would be for the benefit of a future board that I wasn't on. I didn't think I'd be having the ability to lean on that while I was still serving. So
You're the man in charge, so it came in handy, right, years later.
Yeah, it was a reality for me, but we got through it fairly well and managed the revenue side and the expense side and had some real interesting things that are going on. When COVID first started, not to belabor this too long, but when COVID first started, nobody knew which way was up. We were very concerned about everything, concerned about our recording tax, mortgage recording tax, because people may not have money to buy homes, or all projects might stop, so building fees would halt. Well, our building permit application flow is 4 times it normally is, because people started reallocating their money from traveling, et cetera, to let's put money into the house. As you've seen, after things started to settle down in COVID, there was an exodus from, I shouldn't say an exodus, but a lot of people were moving out of New York City or cities and moving to the suburbs. So the demand of residential housing, especially in Westchester, increased. So the recording tax part of that has held its own. The building fee part of that has held its own. Interest on our money is lower because rates are lower. So we've had to do a lot of adjusting, and then also looking forward into the 2021 budget, which we just passed with a less than 1% tax increase. But we had to wrestle with about a $2.5 million worth of expenses that we had to figure out how we were going to deal with. And about $1.5 million of that or so we ended up removing from the budget. So a lot of challenges on the budgetary side and the economic side, but we felt we were prepared for it, and we're well prepared going into 2021.
Bottom line, you had saved for a rainy day over the past decade plus.
We have. And again, I when I first started on that, embarked on that at the end of 2009, I always felt that we didn't have that large luxury when I first got in office in 2008. And it was no disrespect to people that served with me then or before me, but I realized that we needed to change how we did that. So I had proposed and approved a fund balance policy for North Castle, which means every year we need to budget about $120,000 a year or so in the actual budget for contingency with no declared use. That way, if we are in a jam, we've already got $120,000 that we can lean on. We've never had to touch it in all those years, but it's there if we need it. And then part of the fund balance policy was we had to restore the fund balance to a healthy number of somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 to $4 million. And right now it sits at about $10 million. So we've exceeded the goal and then some. And but we didn't have that luxury back in 2008 where the fund balance was below $1 million. So we weren't able to lean on that. So now we're in a little firmer footing and maintaining that for the future as well.
Talk a bit more about the new 2021 budget. Any special features in there, provisos, anything done a bit differently than things have been done before?
Nothing dramatically differently. We always keep a close eye on purchases and non-recurring items. So we knew going into this budget that we've got about $500,000 of non-recurring purchases or items. And we used about $900,000 of the fund balance, part of it for those items. So when you take the $400,000 off of the $900,000 or $500,000 off of the $900,000, you're left with about $400,000. And as I mentioned, 120 of that is a contingency line that we don't intend to use. So now we're using, in real numbers, about $300,000 or so for the operating budget, which is okay. It's there. It's the taxpayer money. It's their money. So we're using it to provide some tax relief. And we wanted to keep the tax increase. It's always below the cap, but even below 1%. So that's what we did there. And we're not on a hiring freeze, but as we have vacancy, there's some attrition. We are closely looking at, do we replace? Do we not replace? As an example, we have 2 vacancies in our police department. We're choosing to hold off for now on replacing those. So things like that. We're looking at what the need is. And is it urgent that we hire and replace, or can we hold off for a while? We've had a few retirements in our highway department. We're not replacing all of them, replacing some of them. So we're going at it in a very granular approach. So we don't have a freeze, but we're not just hiring as soon as somebody leaves. So that's the way we think is the best way to do it right now.
How have you been able to keep the tax increase for 2021 down so low, whereas you see other areas have to up it a bit higher? Is it a matter of need? And I know you have a banking background. Does that background help you when it comes to sitting down and putting a budget together?
I think it does. When I first got involved in public service back in 2008, part of my reason to run was I had a finance background, a degree in economics. I'm a banker, and I thought I might be able to provide some assistance to the town, specifically on the finance side of things. And I like to think that it's had some positive impact on the town. And when we look towards or into 2021, and using a lot of the things that we've learned over the years, we put in a process that we've used since I've been on the board, which is a line-by-line review of the budget, making sure every board member understands every expenditure. And we scrutinize all the departments and the department heads and what their needs are, and we meet with them. This year was a little different. We met partially in person, partially Zoom, and our budget hearings were all Zoom, which was interesting. But in the end, we're here to provide the right level of service for what I call our customers, which are our residents and our taxpayers. But I think it's better to call them customers, because if you call them customers, you'll treat them like customers. And that's what I preach to our employees. And they just want a fair value in return for their taxes. And when we looked at this year, we knew there were tough economic times for everybody. And we always had the tax cap out there, but we've never tripped up the tax cap anyway. And we just wanted to provide a fair budget with the needed essentials and then some, but provide a fair tax rate to the residents, to the customers. And in this case, it was just above zero. It was 0.98 was the exact number. Mm-hmm. So the average household, it's about $30 a year, which was not drastic in our minds. Now, we know there's many houses that are far over that average. There are some obviously below it, but we felt it was a responsible, structurally balanced budget. And we had the ability to pull down some money from our fund balance, which, quite frankly, it's the taxpayers' money, and we were able to use it for that. So we went into the process with our eyes wide open, and we actually started it back in March and April. So I had our town administrator and our director of finance start working on projections and budgetary numbers back in the spring, when we didn't know what was up and what the near term held for us. So we started the analysis and the projections and the budget process through the spring into the summer, and then we were able to hit the ground running in the fall.
You see different levels of government sometimes where leaders seem to think that we can print money like Fort Knox or like a Monopoly game. Is the key to running a government at pretty much any level budgeting the way you would budget for your household?
It's a great question and a great comment. And without offending anybody above me, I will say that if the higher levels of government, including the federal government, would run their budgets the way all the towns and villages did, we would be in better shape, because I've always been very fiscally conservative, and anything that we do, we need to understand, and I need to understand where the money's coming from. So anything that's requested, we need to understand. And if we're adding to, let's say, a particular budget, and somebody says, well, we need this piece of equipment, or we need to expend money on X, Y, and Z. Well, where's that money coming from? Is it coming from a line in the budget that we're cutting? So it's a zero sum game? Or are we adding to the total expenditures that we have? And if so, what's the source of that money? And as much as higher levels of government need to provide in a different way than we do, to me, there still is things that are lost on where is that money coming from. It's going on right now in the latest stimulus package, where the Congress approved something. I don't know directly where that money's coming from. The president was going to, I believe, veto it, but he wanted numbers that might be 3 times that. Again, it begs the question, well, okay, but where's that money coming from? And is everybody involved in the same process here to understand what the source of that money is? Mm-hmm. So local governments, we have to do it. We're required to do it. We can't do a shell game of bait and switch with our residents, and I never, in all the years I've been in public office, sometimes elected officials will say, well, we can underestimate what our real expenses would be, and we can overestimate what our sales tax might be, and that'll give us a better budget to approve. But then the reality is the numbers aren't really there. We do the exact opposite. We underestimate our revenue. We overestimate our expenses because we want to see what the worst case scenario is. And if we're right, we're fine. If we're wrong, we're usually wrong to the good, which is in essence how you can build your fund balance. Mm-hmm. But there's no gymnastics or charade or anything. And most local governments will operate that way because we're the lowest form of government, but we're accountable directly to the people. So, we have to be. So I always felt that if higher levels of government had to run their budgets the way we all did, might be in a slightly better situation than the accumulating debt, that the trillions of debt that keeps building.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes leadership doesn't realize that every decision made has an impact in some way, shape, or form.
It does. And as an example of, use something simple like a piece of equipment. So somebody needs a piece of equipment for $200,000. Okay. So where's that money coming from? Consciously, is there a surplus, let's say in the active budget, where, okay, we didn't spend X amount on that particular line and we have money in the budget to cover that expense, so we're fine. Or we have money over here that we were specifically allocating for unforeseen expenses and we can pull it from there. Okay, well, that's all well thought out. Right now, we're considering, recently, during the spring, we passed a $10 million bond for road improvement. We didn't draw any of it, but we wanted to have the ability in case we wanted to. And we've been paving extensively in town over the last 7 or 8 years. It's more mechanics and economics. Should we borrow that money to finish all the roads in town? Because interest rates are so low right now, and most people on the finance side will tell you, borrow everything you can now because money's so cheap. And then in future years, the money that we would have used to pave would go to pay back the bond. So yeah, you're paying some interest, not a lot, maybe 1%, 1.5% or so, maybe 2%. But the quality of life issue, that's what's really paramount to us. If we can front load 10 years of paving in 1 or 2 years, that improves the quality of life for residents that much quicker. And that's what's important to us. So you have to do it responsibly. And you have to go through that process and do the analysis and understand what you're using the money for. And then you hopefully get to a solution. I will say at the county level, when I talk about going up one level, the county level the last few years has had a very responsible, eyes wide open budget process where this was a tough year. The second year, county executive had proposed and passed a slight increase in sales tax. And then, of course, the bottom dropped out during COVID early on, and they just passed another budget. It's a responsible budget. It actually cuts expenditures, but they go into the process with their eyes wide open. So that's, to me, the way municipalities should do it at any level. Mm-hmm. Just make sure everything is above board. You know exactly what you're spending on. You know exactly where the money's coming from. And it's hopefully, in our case, we always make sure that it's structurally balanced.
I see your approach in North Castle, the county executive's approach for Westchester County. And then you see some mayors across the country budgeting for 2021, including in there what they hope to get from the federal government in this stimulus bill, which not going to be much, if anything, for them, or another stimulus package. And that's just budgeting from one end to the other there, which leads to the question on your end locally in North Castle, can you line item veto something you don't like in the budget?
No, and I'll be honest with you, even if I could personally, I would not. We're a board, and whether any board agrees or doesn't agree on certain things, I'm not a big believer in, if there's things that a supervisor in my case or a mayor or something like that, is in their jurisdiction to make decisions on, et cetera, that's fine. But when it comes to something like that, even if I had the authority, I'd rather have at least a consensus of that body. So we were doing it together. But you referenced something in that same question that is part of what's going on right now you were talking about help for local governments in the stimulus package, which I don't believe it's there. And if it's there, it's not there in a big way.
Yeah.
But it still gets to the question of the source, right? So if the federal government was going to provide help for local governments like ours, that money still has to come from somewhere, right? It doesn't just, it
doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah, they come out of thin air a little bit, which is really bad because then the federal government's borrowing to do it.
Right.
But if they're really going to have a balanced budget, well, then they may have to increase taxes on the back end to get the revenue to pay for that bill, which is going to distribute money to local governments. Well, it's kind of like the same cycle. So I'm probably in the minority on this, but if local municipalities need money, they either have to sharpen their pencil on their expenses, or they may need to go to their residents and say, we're going to need to raise taxes X, Y, and Z to pay for all the things that we need. Now, if you got an influx from the federal government for money, to me, that's almost like a short-term thing, because how you're going to pay for that money is still going to come from somewhere, which is probably the taxpayers at some point.
Right.
So it just doesn't.
It's a vicious cycle, like they say.
Yeah, the money just doesn't appear
right
without any pain from anybody, and that's to me, that's a reality. And what's happened is on the federal level, it's so enormous that things get lost. When you're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions, things just get lost in the numbers. And that's why you have this big federal deficit not being minded for the last few years. And it's dangerous for the future. So that's my, getting up on a soapbox for a second and giving you my opinion on the bigger scale things.
Which you, I guess, provide great perspective there, because we see leaders, mayors, governors across the country say, well, the feds don't care about us. They didn't give us any money. There's nothing in the stimulus package for us. Yet you point out that money has to come from somewhere, so we can't just give it to you.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody necessarily looks at it that way, but if everybody were responsible for it like it was your business.
Right.
And that's sort of the way I look at our town budget. Is it's not my business, but I'm tasked with being responsible for that business and the operations of it and the expenses of it. So, you can't, if you as a hypothetical, wanted to cut taxes, cut them in half and just start borrowing money to pay for all those expenses, because you're not going to cut the expenses, X product, I'm going to cut all my prices in half. So I still have the cost of the inventory and I'm going to sell it, but now I'm going to sell it for half. Well, how long is that going to get you?
Not far. No.
It's just not going to work.
Right.
So whoever's supplying you with the items, you're not going to be able to pay them, so they're not going to give them to you anymore. Or you may have run up debt, and that's going to affect you personally. So elected officials at all levels don't have to deal with those personal responsibilities like directly, but indirectly they should, and it might make for better budgeting all throughout.
Mm-hmm. Mike Schiliro is the town supervisor in North Castle, which is comprised of Armonk, North White Plains, and Banksville. Mike Schiliro, is there a difference in trying to fulfill the needs of all the different portions of the town? What Armonk needs, what North White Plains needs, what Banksville needs? Or does it all pretty much come together as one?
No, it's all different. And a lot of it is just listening, making sure that you're listening to residents in any municipality. You have different areas in each municipality. North White Plains is different than Armonk, is different than Banksville. Excuse me. So there are some general things that carry throughout the town, whether it's recreation and parks and highway. But as an example, there are many, many parts of the town. 90% of our town uses well and septic. So very little of it is on water and sewer. Now, North White Plains is all city water and sewer. Downtown, parts of downtown Armonk are. There's one neighborhood up 22 that has water but no sewer. I live right off of Main Street. I have no water or sewer. So actually, I should say that they just brought a sewer line. A developer just brought a sewer line up the street. I haven't connected yet, but my streets never had sewer until this year.
And what have you done through the years? How have you handled that until now?
However, we have septic. So, it's country living. Even though you're directly next to properties with those water and sewer, it's country living. So, but a big part of it that I've learned over the years is you have to listen and you have to ask questions sometimes so you understand what people's wants and needs are, and you deal with things differently in different parts of town. As an example, when I ran for supervisor in 2013, one of the people on the that were running, Barbara G. DeCinto, won as a councilwoman, and she had pledged to hold monthly meetings in North White Plains because, excuse me, some North White Plains residents felt they were a little detached from the town. Aside from COVID, she's held monthly meetings in North White Plains for just about 7 years, and listening even closer to what people's wants and needs are, and we attend to them. I send frequent emails to the community, and we want to hear from people if they have questions. I never am bothered by somebody even grabbing me in a store and complaining or having an issue. I tell you a quick funny story, a little tidbit. I was shopping in a bookstore in Pleasantville yesterday, terrific little bookstore, and right next to me was President Bill Clinton. So nobody really knows me in Pleasantville. Obviously, everybody knows him, and there were several people that came up and said hi and wished them a happy holiday and asked to take a picture with him. And I was chuckling to myself in that happens to me all the time in North Castle, where people will come up to me and talk to me, ask me questions, but nobody ever asked me to take a picture with them.
You should send out a holiday greeting card to all town residents with your picture on it.
Right. So it's good. And I will say too, though, because your initial comments about the economy and also COVID, it's been such a challenging year. That was new territory, and I'm still learning, but it's taken time to really understand. As you know, in your business, you need to know who your audience is, you need to know who your listeners are, and how to communicate to them. And communicating via COVID was challenging up front, and I just kept working at it and listening and seeing responses of people from my emails and trying to find that tone, which is informative, factual, at times light, maybe some humor, as brief as I can be, genuine, having emotion. So mixing all those things. But what's paramount is, with respect to COVID, is making sure that people will be as safe as they can be, as respectful as they can be, being decent to other people. But the safety piece, modeling good behavior, is something I communicate in every email. It's so important because not just for themselves, but for people that they could potentially infect if they're not careful enough. And then the business owners, and that's the thing I keep hammering home to our residents, is if you're so fed up with, you have COVID fatigue and you don't want to, you're sick of it, but you have to. channel that energy. Pick a business owner or an individual that you know would get really sick if they got it. But if not, pick a business owner. Pick your favorite pizza place and the owner or whatever store. Do it for them. So rechannel your energy and just say, I know this is a pain in the neck, but I'm doing it for Joe or Jane because I want to make sure that their business survives and they don't have to close up shop. Mm-hmm. So things like that, where I was never thinking in these terms 10, 11 months ago, but now I have to, and people look for the leaders of their municipalities to provide some guidance and to take it very responsibly. So, as example, in yesterday's Christmas or holiday email, I snuck in Happy Festivus for those who might celebrate that. Mm-hmm. As a Seinfeld reference. So, people who might get that might chuckle at it, but, it's very serious. COVID's very serious business, but you have to communicate effectively so people will listen and get the message and not tune it out. And it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. And you and your business, you know how challenging that is.
Right. This business changes all the time. Who thought a year ago we'd be podcasting and working from home studios every single day? As one of my colleagues in another media venture said to me, if I said this to you a year ago, we'd be doing this, you'd have told me I'm crazy. And you see, we did what we had to do. We had to convert. We had to transition. And that's,
I was going to ask how normal this is when you're in life is
right.
It's just incredible how normal it is now.
Right. And I have to go out after we record our show and do some things. Got to make sure I have that mask. I walked out one day last week without it and walked the block and went like that. I said, my mask. So I made sure I walked on the other side of the street away from anybody, came back home and got it. Now, you, from what we understand, you could have walked by, and I think you still can walk by the Schiliro household. If you don't have a mask, pick one up and put it on.
Well, we not anymore. What we did back in early COVID was I'd set up bins for people. There was such a shortage, so residents were sewing masks. So I had distributed instructions on how to make masks at the request of some frontline medical workers, a particular doctor in town. And then we set up a system. It's interesting. I communicated with her so often. I've never met her.
Wow.
I would let her know that there were masks in the bins, and at the middle of night or early morning, she'd come by and empty the bins and bring them to the frontline workers. And we did that for probably a month or two. And so that was specifically for frontline workers, not for residents who needed it. However, as things caught up and some manufacturers retooled things, then with the help of George Latimer, we were getting masks that were supplied by apparel suppliers, etc. And so we have plenty now. So when residents do need them or a business, we have ample supply. But on the front lawn, that was just bins for people dropping off masks that they made in their house with sewing machines, and then for the doctor to come and pick them up and bring them to the frontline workers. It was just like America at its best. It was Americana.
Great innovation, I thought that was. And I know it was around the country picked up on that and started to do that too, but it pretty much began right there at home in North Castle. COVID, the second wave, how badly has that hit Armonk? And
it's interesting. The numbers, the active cases is very much high. It's much higher than it was back in the spring and summer. It also happens to be centered in a small number of households. So I feel bad for those households, but that prevents the spread if you have 2 or 3 or 4 people in one household that actively have the virus versus one in every house, which makes it spread. It's spreading quickly. It's very, very contagious. It almost seems more contagious than it was back then. We're also smarter now, so we know how to treat it. We know better how to prevent it. But it is spreading, but based on the county numbers, that seems to have peaked, and we seem to be coming down on the other side as well. Mm-hmm. So the other impact is for our food establishments, and I feel bad for them because of the outdoor dining. It's gotten colder, so we've expanded our outdoor dining availability for them. Our building departments work very closely with some of the restaurants that had tents that wanted to enclose them and then put in electric heaters. Some people say, well, what's the difference? It's still indoors. The difference is the distancing. So as an example, if you have 60 seats inside and now you can only have 30 inside, if you have a tent, now you could have 30 outside, and now you're back to what you used to be. Mm-hmm. So that's the benefit for a restaurant, is they try to recapture the number of seats that they used to have before. And people are still eating outside. People are eating outside today because it was a little bit warmer, and people are getting used to it. People are getting used to sitting outside in colder weather if they really want to go out.
Right.
So, but it is a challenge, and when I communicate to residents, many times it's about not just supporting those businesses in buying from them, whether it's takeout or dine-in or gift certificates, but also modeling the right behaviors so there is no more shutdown. That's even more important.
I guess with the holidays here now in full swing, we can put out the advisory together here to avoid large gatherings within households in order to keep the COVID spread down. And I think that's really important to this. You know, you see people, hear about people, they're getting 18 people together for Christmas. Like, why at this point? So I think we together can put out that a word of caution to let's stay where we are for this year so we can do it all together the way we used to next year.
And it's understandable with people with aging parents or relatives, and we get that, but it's paramount to keep them safe. But like you said, where you can, like for us, I'm Italian, we have big Christmas Eve, Christmas Day dinners.
Yep.
It's going to be 4 of us. One of my daughters is out of state and she can't come in.
Right.
So it's going to be 4 of us today for Christmas Eve, 4 of us tomorrow for Christmas Day. And, that's just the way it's going to be.
Right, that's why you have Zoom. You can talk to your relatives on Zoom now, right?
And that's what we're doing.
We got 3 in my house, myself, father, brother, and we are always, got a pretty big house here, so we're always socially distanced, one on one level, one on the other, and me in my humble abode here, this part of the house. So, and it works out, so that's what it all comes down to, basically.
It does, big picture.
Yep, and a big Italian family here too, reduced down to 3 for this year, so we'll just keep it at that. And hopefully next year, everybody can all get together again. Here we go into 2021 in just a few days. We have the vaccine now. What's your hope for the new year, especially with the vaccine, and especially, hopefully, we can get things back to normal, let's say, by the middle of the year. We hope, we think, if all goes according to plan.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. When I'm shopping or when I'm in town on Main Street or in church, and I look around and I start to visualize and dream about, boy, when can it be normal again, where no masks are required and you get to see people, and so that that I'm hopeful for, that with the vaccine and whatever the herd mentality piece means, that eventually we can get back to what we consider normal. I think it'll be a new normal. I don't know that masks are ever going away now because they seem to prevent things. If there's a next flu season, I think it's become accepted now. So if you saw somebody with a mask in a year, I don't think anybody would think twice. There's probably a purpose for it. But, I am hopeful that we'll get back to some type of normalcy. And I do think that although some of us have had some slowing down, which was okay, and some peace, we all miss that human interaction. You need that human interaction. It's like food. It's like fuel.
Right.
So I said to my wife the other night, jokingly, I'm like, when this is over, can you imagine the parties that are going to happen next summer?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I can think of a few people who probably think now, hey, Marino, you call me too much during this. So, but I can't see you. It's the only way we could really stay
That's okay.
Personal contact, instead of emails or texting. I think a phone call works better than an email or a text, a bit more personal that way.
Yeah.
Hopefully in a year from now, we can all have Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa just the way we normally do. But for right now, we have to do what we have to do. Michael Schiliro is the town supervisor in North Castle, Armonk, Banksville, North White Plains. Mike Schiliro, happy holidays to you and yours. Happy New Year. All the best in 2021. We'll talk to you again, hopefully early in the new year. All the best.
Thanks, John. Buon Natale, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy everything to everybody. And stay safe, enjoy your family, and hopefully we'll speak soon.
I'm glad you said Buon Natale. Now I could say Bożego Narodzenia, Wesołych Świąt, Wesołych Nowidok, Froiliche Weihnachten, Joyeux Noel, Feliz Navidad, and Feliz Natal. We covered a whole bunch of languages there.
Wow.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all the best to everybody.
Impressive.
Here on Westchester Talk Radio, Michael Schiliro, we thank you. WestchesterTalkRadio.com. Town Supervisor in North Castle, Michael Schiliro here on Westchester Talk Radio, produced by Sharc Creative and made possible by our friends at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center, supporting our communities through April of 2021. Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon, Park Sterling Realty in Bronxville, and Michael Labriola Landscape Design and Construction in Armonk in the town of North Castle. Catch all of our Westchester, Fairfield County, Putnam, and Dutchess Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.